Introduced to the Nikon Theater stage, Nikon Ambassador, Deanne Fitzmaurice.
Thank you, Mike. Thanks. Hi, everyone. I'm really happy to be here, and I thank Nikon for inviting me and for the support they provide. So as a photojournalist, I'm interested in telling stories, whether the story is in a single image or in multiple images. My life is a balance, and I use that word loosely, between assignments and projects. So I'll have an editor call me and say, hey, Deanne, we've got this project we want you to do. And I love collaborating with editors. I love deadlines. And I love projects. Now, sometimes an assignment turns into a project, and sometimes a project turns into an assignment. But they're both different. And projects, I really encourage everyone to find a project, something that you're passionate about. And I'm going to talk about my projects and where they come from, how I find my projects. I'll share with you some projects that didn't work out and some projects that turned into long, 14-year projects. So there's a theme that runs through a lot of my work, and that is the human connection. It's about building rapport. For people to let me into their lives, I have to build trust. So I'm going to talk about that. So my father was a fighter pilot, and from him I learned about courage and fearlessness. My mother was a librarian, and from her I learned about storytelling. These two things have really served me well as a storyteller. So let's talk a little bit about how you find a project. Something happened earlier this fall. I got a call from an editor asking me to go down to Houston to photograph Hurricane Harvey. And I wasn't able to go for one reason or another. And shortly after that, another editor called me and asked me to go to Puerto Rico for Hurricane Maria. Now, I'm really not shooting a lot of news these days, so it was unusual, but it really got me thinking. It got me thinking about climate change and about these natural disasters that are happening all right in a row, and they're all the worst things that we have seen. So I started thinking about it, and I'm trying to follow the path of the stories that I need to be doing and trying to pay attention to signals. And that really got me thinking about, I need to do something with this. So I get back home to San Francisco after some traveling, and the California wildfires had just happened. And so many people I know had been impacted. At Think Tank, our offices are in Santa Rosa, and we have colleagues and friends who lost their homes, so it felt very close to home. So I decided I'm going to go document this. So I just received my D850. I had just arrived, my new camera, so I grabbed that and went up to Santa Rosa to try to document this story. And I just couldn't believe the devastation that I saw. I mean, these fireplace chimneys, it looked like tombstones. There was just so much devastation. The cars had just melted. I couldn't believe what I was seeing. The bumpers just melted right off. And I was able to get a drone and go up and get some aerial footage. But 5,000 people have lost their homes in Santa Rosa, so the impact was tremendous. But as a photojournalist, I really wanted to tell the human story. So about a week later, I hear that they're letting families back so they can go through the debris and see if there's anything that they can salvage. Now, I drove to this neighborhood where, all the homes were gone. And I started driving around, and I saw people who were sifting through this debris, just looking for something, and a ring, a piece of jewelry, and they weren't finding much. But I gotta tell you, it was so hard for me to park my car, get out of it, and walk up to one of these families, to the people who have lost everything. So it's a very difficult thing to do, and it runs through a lot of my work. Is like, okay, how do I make a connection? How do I get access to this story? And it's about trust and rapport. So finally, after circling around and building up my courage, I parked my car and I went walking up to this man, Brent. And he told me, he was a little bit hesitant at first, but started opening up to me and told me that him being on crutches, his next door neighbor had to come and rescue him and get him out of the house with 10 minutes notice. Now, he introduced me to his next door neighbor, and this is Autumn, and she and her husband are the ones who had rescued him. So one neighbor starts introducing me to the next neighbor, and it's all about building trust. And Autumn shows me this is about all she was able to salvage. The next house down, this family, Trent and his family, they searched through the debris, then they stood there, they held their hands, and said goodbye to their home. It was an emotional moment. And then they introduced me to their next door neighbor, and all they were able to salvage was these little angels. And they introduced me to the next neighbor, and that was John, 80 years old, and he had lost everything. And here he's looking through his tool chest to see if any tools survived. And throughout the holidays, it was incredible just to see the resiliency of these people. They had a sense of humor, and hope. I saw so much hope and resiliency. And I'm an optimist by nature, and I'm looking for that. And so I'm documenting the story with this, to show this hope and resiliency of the people, put the Christmas stockings up. But I did pitch a story with this project to an editor, and the story is going to run in a couple of weeks. So sometimes I started as a personal project, and I'm able to figure out how to pitch it as a story to an editor. So I went to Cuba earlier this year, and I went down there to do a baseball story. Now, projects, sometimes they work and sometimes they don't, and this one did not work out. So I figure, okay, here I am in Cuba, now what do I do? My baseball story isn't working, and it was a lack of access to the story I was going for. I can't tell you how many times I've been told no, and it's just a matter of figuring out how to get around it. I try to figure out why they're saying no. But, there's all these changes in Cuba. It had been opened up, and now it's being closed down again with U.S. policy. So I just tried to get a sense of who the people are and to tell their story. These two young women, they were just sitting there on a Wi-Fi corner getting a signal. I walk into a barbershop, and it's the most exciting thing. The music's blaring, everyone's having fun. It's a big social center. And I just love that about the Cuban people. They're absolutely wonderful. They're filled with so much life. And then I stop and I say, okay, I'm gonna just stop and get a cup of coffee. You're sitting there, and pictures just happen in front of you. This woman came and sat down, pulls up a fan, and I'm always trying to layer my pictures with imagery. Layer them with storytelling elements. And the old cars are great, but just working this scene to try to get as many layers as I could. And color, everything is so vibrant there. And the teenagers hanging out on the Melicon. So earlier in my career, I was a staff photographer at the San Francisco Chronicle, and my husband, Kurt Rogers, was a staff photographer at the San Francisco Examiner. And so we would shoot sports. Here we are on the sidelines of a baseball game, a Giants game at Candlestick Park. So I was shooting sports at the time, and I really liked capturing action, capturing moments, the 49ers, the Giants, it's just, we had some good teams, and so I loved shooting action. Sometimes it was kind of dangerous on the sidelines, here at a football game, I'm there on the sidelines, I'm kneeling, I've got my long lens on a monopod, and a player started running right towards me, and he's going full speed. All the other photographers are lined up, and I'm kneeling there, and I look, and he's just coming full speed directly at me. And I think, okay, this is where I die. So I'm like halfway up, I'm about in this position, and he's just right there, and just picked me up and kept running with me all the way to the stands. So yeah, I did get a little bit lucky there, but I really became interested in who these people are, much more so than the action. I love capturing the action, but I want to know, who are these people? So at the time, Barry Bonds was a big deal. I think a lot of you know of Barry Bonds. He had a reputation. He was breaking all the records, but had a reputation of not wanting to be photographed. So this was a typical Barry Bonds reaction. And I thought, who is this guy really? I want to do a story about him. I want to get behind this wall he puts up. So I went to the Giants and I said, hey, what do you think? Could I do a story? And they said, no way, not going to happen. Barry won't allow it. Then they said, go to his agent. I went to his agent, same thing. Nope, not going to happen. So, here you can see he didn't even want his father near him. But I got an assignment to go down to spring training. So I get to go down to Arizona, and the day Barry arrives, it's always a big deal. And so, Barry shows up, and he just sat down on the field like this. And so I swung my lens over to photograph him, and he looked at me and glared at me. And I thought, oh, geez, now what do I do? He's intimidating me. I'm afraid to photograph him. What am I going to do? So I somehow got up some courage, and I went walking over to him. And I didn't know what I was going to say, but when I got there, I said, Barry, do you have a problem with me photographing you? And if so, are there some boundaries that I should know about? And, I hadn't really thought it out. He could have said, yes, don't photograph me, but he thought about it for a moment, and then he said, okay, I don't have a problem. What's your name? Who are you shooting for? So at that moment, I had broken through this wall he put up around himself, and I was able to get access. I started talking to him before games, and I would say, Barry, your fans want to know who you are. I'd like to tell the story of who you are. So I got access here in the locker room. It was legendary that he had this big leather recliner, and so I was able to shoot that, and just looking for pictures that say something about who he is. I went to the gym with him, and he said, hey, Deanne, I want you to meet my workout partners. So these little surprises, the unpredictable pictures, these are the things I love. These are the things I go for, the things you couldn't imagine before you start a story. And on his last day as a San Francisco Giant, I was able to get a little bit of access. I was able to get behind the scenes a little bit because the security guard at the dugout, he knew I was working on this. His name's Carlos, and I would always call him by name and stop and talk with him. And that's another big part of my work, is making connections with the people around the edges, building trust with the people that I photograph, but also building rapport with people around the edges. Carlos let me hang back for just an extra minute to get this storytelling picture. So after I did that story, I started to get calls from Sports Illustrated and ESPN asking me to shoot assignments because they thought, okay, she's doing behind-the-scenes work with athletes, more human stories about the athletes. So Jabari Parker, I was able to get a cover, Sports Illustrated. But whenever they assign me to something, they're asking me to get the behind-the-scenes type things, like I did with Barry Bonds. Here's Steph Curry after NBA Finals, World Series. Just shooting a sense of place is what they were looking for. Madison Bumgarner, MVP, World Series, on the vehicle with him. And Sports Illustrated assigned me to the Super Bowl, and I banked the whole game on this one picture. I was up on the roof, and I really just wanted the winning quarterback with this logo. And I waited all game long for this, but it worked out. It ran in Sports Illustrated, and Peyton Manning his agent contacted me and said, hey, Peyton Manning would like a photo, so sent him a print, and And he said, oh, send 2, we'll sign 1 for you. So I get 1 back. And I had really carefully composed this picture. The picture I got back from Peyton Manning, he had signed all the way across the picture. That's okay. So, I've also done some politics, but again, trying to find the human stories there. So I was in Iowa. It was 2008. Barack Obama was running for president. And so I went and photographed one of his events. I met one of his campaign aides. His name was Mark, and introduced myself, told him a little bit about what I was working on, and so then I hear, okay, the next day, Mike Huckabee, who was also running, was going to be getting a haircut. And I thought, oh, this is great. I can get an exclusive. So I go to Mike Huckabee's haircut. And it seems like there were a lot of other photographers that thought they were going to get an exclusive as well. But I heard that Barack Obama had this great event. He was going to be speaking at this community center. So I went there, and I didn't want to get just the picture of Barack Obama speaking. I wanted something special. So I look around the room, and the room is absolutely packed with people, and it was like every member of the media was there. So I'm thinking, okay, how can I get something different? So, looking around the room, and I think, wow, there in the middle of the room is a bride and a groom. I couldn't believe it. A woman in a wedding gown and a guy in a suit. So I worked my way through the crowd, and I went up to them, and I said, what are you doing here? And they said, oh, you're not going to believe it. We just got married. We're on our way from our wedding to our reception. And we thought we'd stop for a minute and see if we could catch a glimpse of Barack Obama. So I said, well, this is interesting. Something's going to happen here. And I thought, well, maybe I could layer this. I could just have the bride and groom with Barack Obama behind them. But instead, I see Mark, the campaign aide, who I had met a few days earlier. He comes working through the crowd up to the bride and groom. And I heard him say, hey, would you like to come backstage and meet Barack Obama? And they said, we'd love to. So off they go, and I just tucked in right behind them and worked my way over to them. So I'm walking over to the backstage area, and the Secret Service lets them go through, and they see me with my cameras, and they say, whoa, no way, you're not going through there, you're not going backstage. And Mark turned around and said, she's the wedding photographer. So again, people around the edges just kind of helping you out. And so I think it's an important lesson, and it's really helped me with my work in trying to tell these human stories, just making that human connection. So I was able to get something a little bit different. This is Mark over there on the left. I got this commission. So, I talk about the assignment work and the project work. This one, I got a call out of the blue from a woman who works with a nonprofit, and she said, would you be interested in doing a project photographing modern-day Rosie the Riveters, these women that are working in, manufacturing trains and buses throughout the United States? I said, sounds like a great project. So anyways, I got the project, and then I said to her, how'd you find me anyway? And she said, oh, I just Googled famous women photojournalists. And I said, really? Okay, that's news to me. So it was a great project. I worked on it for a couple of years, ended up becoming an exhibit in Los Angeles and in New York. Another project I did, I was asked to go shoot stills for a documentary film crew that was working in Kenya, in Kibera, in the slums. And they were working on a story about women and girls working their way out of poverty. So it was an incredible project being able to capture these moments. But along the way, I found out about these kids. Like, here is some children who don't go to school, and they're looking in through the windows of a school where the kids are going to school. But I found out that there's a lot of homeless kids, a lot of street kids there. And I found out about this orphanage that had rescued 100 kids. So I teamed up with a producer friend of mine, and we've been working on this story for a few years, about 3 years now, trying to tell the story of some of these street kids. So, some of these kids, some of them get rescued and do really well, and some of them feel more comfortable staying on the streets. But I learned so much about the hierarchy, how they create their own culture and their own community. So some of these projects are short projects, some of them are long projects. This is a 14-year project that I want to share with you. It started in 2003, and I got an assignment for the San Francisco Chronicle to photograph a little Iraqi boy who had come to America for medical treatment. What had happened is back in his village, the war had just started. He and his brother were walking home from school. They picked up what they thought was a ball, but it turned out to be a bomb. It exploded and killed the older brother, the 16-year-old brother, and Salah, here, 9 years old, he survived, but he lost one hand, fingers on his other hand, he lost an eye, and his abdomen was blown open. But his father came to the scene and picked up his one surviving son and brought him to an Iraqi hospital where they said, we're not gonna be able to save him. Your only hope is to bring him to the Americans. So he was brought to an American Air Force base, and then the doctors there connected him with doctors in America. So Salah, along with his father, was flown to America on a military aircraft alongside injured soldiers. So that's where I picked up the story. I walked into this hospital, and the day that Salah had arrived, and and I was absolutely floored by what I saw, and it was, very difficult to photograph this. But I went back to my editor and I said, I'd really like to continue following this story. The writer and I said, yes, we want to continue with this, and our editor said yes. But what we had to do is we had to gain access. We had to gain access with the hospital so they would let us go in and do this story. And so the administrators at the hospital, they said, if you can get Rahim and Salah to agree, then it's okay with us. So I needed to build trust with them. So I spoke with Rahim through an interpreter. And, the thing I learned with Barry Bonds was speaking honestly, speaking from the heart, and saying what I thought. And that's what I did with Rahim. And I said, through the interpreter, it's really important for me to tell this story. I want to show the story of what has happened to your son, from this war. And I want to tell his story. And so Rahim agreed and gave me access. So I started working on the story, and I would show up for important things like surgery, but then I would just show up on an ordinary day when nothing was happening. And here Rahim hadn't told Salah that his older brother had died yet because he was afraid that he wouldn't heal. But Salah started to get a little bit better and went down to the cafeteria. Kids were looking at him, and he got upset, came back upstairs. The nurses taped a Sharpie to his arm, and the first thing he drew was airplanes dropping bombs. As he continued to get better, there was a Arabic-speaking custodian who would come up, and they'd play soccer. And around this time, Salah also decided that he wanted to be a photographer because he always saw me there with my camera. So I would wrap the camera strap around him, and he'd go walking around, and he would, he's a kid, he has such a beautiful heart, and he doesn't let anyone tell him there's something he can't do, and he would just use his stump to fire the shutter of the camera to photograph his favorite nurses. The story changed at this point. We thought that after 6 weeks, Salah was going to go back to Iraq, but insurgents had ransacked the family home where the mother and the other kids were, and they thought that Rahim must be an American spy, and that's why his son was getting treatment in America. So they put up wanted posters for Rahim, and the family had to go on the run. So Rahim knew it wasn't safe for he and Salah to go back to America, so they got a little apartment. I would show up on important days like that when they were moving in, but I'd also show up on an ordinary day like at the grocery store. And here people were staring at Salah, and he got upset, went running up, and he had a meltdown, and he just fell to his father's feet crying. And this is a very difficult picture to shoot, because you want to be, as a human, you want to console, but I knew that as a photojournalist, it was so important to shoot this photo to show the highs and lows, the ups and downs, the emotional lows that Salah was experiencing. But I think what was happening here is he was realizing that he was never going to go back to Iraq and never going to see his family again. He was brought into a school, and Rahim got a job as a custodian at the same hospital that had saved Salah. But he was really worried about his family back in Iraq. So he applied for asylum to stay in America for he and Salah, and also applied for his family to be brought over. And they were granted that asylum. So the writer and we ended up going to Iraq because we wanted to follow the journey of the family back to be reunited. And so we met them here on the border of Jordan and Iraq. And this is Hadia, Salah's mom, the other kids, and Rahim's brother, who had helped them get to the border, who had helped them make the dangerous journey out of Iraq. And Hadia, she's getting her papers done in Jordan in preparation to go to America. And I asked her through an interpreter, I said, how does it feel to be going to America? And she said, I won't believe it until I see my son. The last time she saw him, she didn't know if he was going to survive. So this is the moment when Rahim sees, where they see each other. Now, so I had been on the same airplane with them, but I had gone to the airport ahead of time before I went to Iraq and spoke with the administrators and asked them if there was any way I could get off the airplane first so I could be in position to get this photo. And they helped me with that. So I was able to get rushed through customs so that I could capture these moments of the reaction of Salah seeing his mom for the first time in a year. It had been over a year. And the little baby, Ali, he had been born just after the accident, so Salah and Rahim hadn't even met him yet. So they went back home to the family apartment, and they were so happy to be together singing and dancing, and Hadia was making Salah's favorite home-cooked meals again. And here she was joking with Rahim, telling him that he got fat since he came to America. But I continued to follow the story, and I have over the years, and Salah was just making do without prosthesis. They had tried to fit him, and he just didn't like them. They were heavy, they were clunky, claw-like, and so he just made do. I continued to follow him through his teenage years, and as he went to high school here on the city bus, graduating from high school. And he finally had the opportunity to get some good prosthesis at UCSF. And so here you can see that he has one on his right hand and he's getting fitted for one on the left hand. So I stood back in this room and just kind of waiting for moments to unfold, not sure what to expect. I try to, that's my approach, I want to be a fly on the wall. So I'm standing in the back of the room, the doctor leaves the room, and I'm just standing there, and I'm ready with my camera for anything that might happen. And I look, and I see this moment. Rahim shook Salah's hand, and it was the first time he had been able to do that since Salah was 9 years old. So continuing to document this story, it's taking some new twists and turns. So I'm just following it wherever it goes. So I encourage all of you to find a personal project, something that you believe in, and something that's meaningful, and just a human story to help explain this world that we live in. So thank you, and you